Welcome to another episode of TPM Ridge, the podcast where we bring in industry leaders in technical program management to share their insights, experiences, and the lessons they've learned on the front lines of the TPM movement. I'm your host, Doran Katz, and each week we dive in deep into the methodologies, mindsets, and tools that will empower you to drive excellence in technical program management. Whether you're new to TPM or looking to take your skills to the next level, this podcast is your go-to resource for transforming TPM principles into real-world success. Welcome. Alongside me virtually today, we have Michael Gotts, our European chapter lead. And today in our virtual studio, we have Paul Currivan. Welcome, Paul. He is our special guest today, a highly experienced individual all the way from Switzerland with an extensive background in technical product and program management. Most recently, he served as the Senior Director of Technical Product and Program Management for the Data and AI Division in Geneva, Switzerland, where he led over 50 technical program managers and oversaw agile processes for over 700 engineers. His leadership was instrumental in implementing OKR settings and tracking, standardizing metrics for software development cycles, and achieving significant cost savings through FinOps practices. Before his tenure at Expedia, Paul founded and managed PEC Consulting, a consulting specializing in ETL, data migration, and enterprise data warehousing. His clients included major firms like Microsoft, Accenture, and IBM. And his experience as a lecturer, of course, in economics and quantitative methods at the Institute of Technology. Welcome, Paul. And how about you tell us about yourself? Because I've given you the templated profile that I've picked up on your profile, but in your own words.
Thank you. Nice to meet you guys. Thank you for inviting me. So I actually moved to Switzerland about 13 years ago to pursue my passion of snowboarding. And I found a job in Zurich with UBS as a building their data warehouse. I didn't really like Zurich, and I wanted to move to Geneva. I saw an advertisement for a BI manager with Expedia, thought that suited my remit, as I had wanted a career. I was moving from the consultancy basis to more career, see if I could grow the ladder and experience being within an organization. Expedia hired me after a few ruffles when I started because the hiring manager didn't tell the other managers I was coming in. So my role was actually in the middle of a lot of other managers. So they said, hey, you've just done project management. I did PMP just before I went to Switzerland. They said, can you be our project manager? And I was like, it's not really can I do other stuff? And they said, well, why don't you do the technical side, do the agile? You can do some of the technical aspects of the product. So we created a role. And 13 years later, I was senior director of that role, and I moved on. I left Expedia in January just for rest. I think I hadn't had a vacation for more than 3 weeks since I was 16. So I've really enjoyed the last few months working with sustainable NGOs, reading retrospectively about how I could have done things better. I am a lifelong learner. I love to read. When I was in the role, I was highly passionate about what we should be doing and what we do for the organization and the credit we should get for that.
Yeah, excellent. Thanks. Every week we select a topic of prominent interest to the TPM world. And today we're going to have a conversation about scaling as a TPM. What does that mean and see where that leads us to. So thanks for that intro. And let's start off first with the high level. So speaking about scale, TPM means different things to different organizations. So before we look at different areas and skill sets to be a TPM, an effective TPM, what are the common skills, foundational ones that you see every successful TPM should possess, in your experience, your time at Expedia and before that?
As a TPM, you can come from many, many backgrounds. So any of you can look across your teams and see people who come from project management, engineering, product, test. They all kind of evolve into the TPM role. So they all come with strong degrees of experience and skills in different areas in the tech world. We can also manage different domains. We can be 8 people, 16 people, 32, domain, organization, enterprise. And finally, the role definition can change per organization. A program manager at Microsoft may be a product manager in other organizations. You might have pure PMO operations. So we all work within different organizational designs for the role. I take a spectrum of like pure project management all the way up to defining a feature on a platform or on a UI as a product manager. And organizations differ as to how product we are and how program we are. I think first and foremost, the program manager, technical product manager is the person who should have the project ownership. Out of everything that we're responsible for, if the project is on the rails, everyone looks to the TPM. So you need to have high skills within project management. A couple of years ago, when Expedia did a reorg, I had a lot of people coming from multiple different backgrounds wanting to become a TPM. They may have been in the same situation as I was when I first joined Expedia. They were kind of corralled in here and thought it was a good option. And, I very quickly identified that they were great in a number of other skills, but not in project management, which was you're supposed to take something and get it from here and get it delivered and with all the bells and whistles that should be associated with it. So you need to upgrade. You need to, ideally, I think my PMP certification many, many years ago has stood to me rock solid foundation, not just project management, building a plan, but dependency management, risk management, value chain analysis, all the disciplines within project management that someone coming from the technical side wouldn't actually see, but they know agile. These are core skills. For me, I'm a great advocate of thinking. So systems thinking, critical thinking, design thinking. I've always read about these aspects. And I tend to look at everything in TPM world as a system. It is a system that has to interact with other systems, whether it's the system of culture, the process, the discipline of agile that you think you're doing, the agile that you have in motion. The organization is waterfall, the engineers are the only thing that's agile, so that you have many different aspects. So you should be good at those things. Then you have your core strengths. You might be high in engineering, you might be high in program management, you might be broad organizational skills, you might be a wicked communicator. But these are obviously things you need to have. Some key characteristics that you definitely need to have is you need to be the embodiment of continuous improvement. If you're the person who's going to stand in front of a team and say, hey, how can we get better? You better be the person who they look at and go, oh my God, this person is, drinks the Kool-Aid. They read so much, they come with new ideas, they're always trying to make us better. You have to be that person in the room, because otherwise everyone's not going to line up to this continuous improvement thing that you're looking for blame, or you're identifying who did the wrong thing. It's not that. So you need to be humble. You need to always look to improve yourself. And then people will follow that leadership. I think after that, time management, when a TPM turns up late for a meeting, it can't look good, or when they forget something, or, they drop the ball on something that might be rudimentary. You need to be the best person in the room in time management. You need to manage your time effectively. You need to be able to say no properly. So you can go deep in any of those aspects. And I'm sure we'll hit them with your questions.
Yeah.
So welcome, Paul, also from my side. Glad to have you back. We had the pleasure in one of the panels in Europe, and talking about like scaling. Let's focus on the essentials. What is your definition of scale? And maybe you can set this also in the context for TPM, because many definitions of scale are out there, and let's deep dive into that first.
I did read quite a few definitions of scale to kind of find the one that suited me. But the one I found, I don't really know what the source was. It said scalability is the measure of a system's ability to increase or decrease in performance and cost in response to changes in application and systems processing demands, right? So I thought that was generic enough to be applied to a technology, an application, and to a person. So it's how you react to complexity and change. That's your ability to scale. Whether you I was quite different. I love change. The more complex it is, the more chaos. I kind of like that. That's nice. I don't shy away from it. I dive in. So you have to be able to react properly to changes in the environment. And that is scaling. If we look at technology scale, it is improving the performance as more users jump on. How do you do that? And when I first got the topic, I wanted to look at, as a TPM, how do you scale your skills in order to react to the scale that's required in your organization? And whether that's scaling up from, suddenly you have a small team to a large team, suddenly there's an organizational change and you've half the team. Suddenly you have no team. You're now a program manager who's managing dependencies across a division. How you manage that is really important. And that's the way I'm going to approach this discussion, I hope. Obviously with your guidance.
All right. So I think like we come from a very Jira one to a very like TPM focused one. I mean, like in today, like we want to also focus like on 3 categories or domains where TPMs need to scale. And we divided a little in applications and process and technology. And let's do like more or less a little bit rapid fire on the application side for today.
We could probably also talk about people as well. I think Paul mentioned scale, but we'll talk about the interesting bit. Not so much people person, but we'll talk about application and on the other ones.
I think let's address the elephant in the room first. Like talking about application, what is the first one, and talking about large scale project. I think we should do a word count on how often we use scale today. So, what do you think like are common applications or tools that are essential for large scale projects? What is your favorite one?
I've worked with many, and I first started with Microsoft project on extremely large project builds because I was partnering with IBM and they were by the book, build a plan, review the plan. Everything was the WPS. Some of these names are coming back badly. When I went to Expedia, we used TFS, the Microsoft suite at the time. I think it had been built under SourceSafe. And then we moved into Jira. And, teams would kind of use Jira to report up to me. But then under the hood, some of them were using Trello to manage their sprints because they found that like very free. So I think organizationally, the tool becomes the monster. Jira became a reporting suite for the dev cycles, and it's not built as a reporting suite. So if you trigger an alert for velocity dipping on team 5 and they have to explain it, it could be they had someone ill or they were adopting a new technology, but then you suddenly had to explain this to some leader as to why performance was dipping. So it can become a slave as well. So you have to choose your technology pretty well. I really like Jira if it's used well. The reason why I didn't like Trello was because I couldn't go in and see it. If I wanted to review someone's planning, Trello didn't tell me enough about the roadmap, how they were looking at release cycles. So if you use Jira well and you use it for your release cycles, your versioning, if you can bundle aspects into your release across multiple projects, then it's a great tool. When I was in the trenches, I used Jira to manage like 5 or 6 teams with a very large build. And I was able to look and see if teams were behind schedule approximately, not definitely, because we're working agile. If something went red, I'd have a conversation as to why. And, I might adjust things. It was more indicative of something. So I really like Jira, but I know a lot of people hate Jira because it becomes such a beast. It's like, did you fill in Jira this week? And it's not a real-time reporting system. It's supposed to be there to help you with your projects. It's originally an issue tracker that has become like the de facto project tool for most companies. I don't know, there was some joke on LinkedIn that, aliens landed and they couldn't figure out Jira, so they left. So it can be super, super complex in organizations. But other than that, sorry, go ahead.
Oh, no, I was going to say that, it's not just the tool, it's the process and the mechanisms on how to use the tool, right? So I think that's what you're alluding to.
Yeah. And the thing I liked about Jira was it had a lot of reports off the sprint. So teams could look at scope change, they could look at velocity, they could use them to indicate improvement, in their own cycle of things. I particularly didn't mind how they operated within the cycle. They could use whatever methodology worked for the team. They were self-managing, but I was able to look at what came out. And what came out was, if it wasn't up to standard, then you could have questions. But it was always indicative to me, not very exact. Which it shouldn't be. It's agile.
Yeah. Yeah. Are there any other tools that you have in your
Miro,
portfolio?
Miro. I love Miro. I don't know what that bucket of tools is called, but
Yeah.
whiteboarding, being able to. I remember the first time I used it, I was doing a remote Inception, and I think it was the one before Miro. And my manager at the time was like, "What is this thing you're using? This is crazy." And I showed him, and it was like rapid prototyping, and he was like, "It's crazy." And I think about 6 months ago, he had a presentation, and it was all on Miro, and I was just so happy that he had seen the value of that tool in being able to rapidly build something and for people to go in and and just change it around until it locked into something. So I think that kind of collaborative build tool, especially remote, is super super useful. And I've used it in rooms as well to do presentations, showing people different things.
I think like before it was called like real time board. This is when I discovered it, and they have come a long way. Like I love the Miro 24 free feature, so you can just hit a URL and you can get things spinning. I think
Yeah,
one
it's great.
Paul, one question on failure. Like everyone loves failure because we can take a lot of learnings from it. Like can you share an example where it, like an failed application implementation was really like during scaling was really affecting how the organization was operating? Like,
I worked for a hedge fund company many years ago. We were building. I was in charge of the migration. They were taking an old system built on a very old technology. I can't remember. It's about 20 years ago, and we were moving it to a new business process engine. By DB2 as back end. It was all this BPM language by IBM. It was super, super cool. There was like back office management of hedge funds. So the hedge fund would land in, a transaction had to make it through the steps within defined times. If it didn't, 1% fee on an £8 billion transaction, it could be quite expensive. So it was really important that that process engine was kicking perfectly. And after a year and a half, it was wound down and it had cost 130 million. The reason why is that they never looked at how, they never spent enough time to work out how the database would actually work with these transactions coming in. Because they wanted the transaction to manage the meta of the asset plus the back office stages. And an asset would have, not all of them had the same behavior. So it was just, they never spent enough time. And I was on the migration side and I was like migrating from the old system to this changing tabular system in the new system. So I was always late. The project was always being rebuilt. And, from that, I learned my way of adapting to it was to report in a waterfall fashion, but execute in an agile fashion. So I pulled the testers into the same room as the business people. I pulled a development team in and we went through each of the cycles of development on their prototyping as to how the system should work on the engine, the processing engine. And then when we locked it, I would then start loading into that schema. So then we could start testing it. And we did this without telling the management because that would have been against the rules. It was like, no, you should do this stage first. But we knew we couldn't do that stage first because we weren't even ready. So we just went into this rapid testing, and that was cool. The project failed because of those reasons of, it was very waterfall. You just couldn't work. You had to do it in a prototype fashion because it was an adaptive and innovative system that they were building. What I took away from that was never do testing at the end of your cycle. Have your testers as close to the build, do it as often as possible. And, do it in increments. See if you can get something out that you can present to something. And that for me was the best thing, best failure ever, because I was able to take that to every other project I worked on. And any project after that was like, why are we building something for 6 months? And back in when I started developing, I don't think I ever in my early career developed a product that was used. I'd be brought in 6 months, we'd build this thing. I'd ring back, hey, are you using it? No, we dumped it. It didn't work because, we're working on specs built, waterfalls. So that was horrendous to have worked for that amount of time and not get value. So, and there was one thing that we don't look at, Michael, is the rare times we have massive, great achievements on projects. Why did that one work as opposed to all the other ones that didn't? And I don't have many that were perfect. Yeah, but those that were, I could revert to why they worked, and the more agile and co-located it was, the more effective those projects were, and the more iterative you were with your customers. The closer, the better.
Yeah.
And you get negative scaling.
Yeah. But
Yeah.
the scale is about testing it. Like two products we worked on in Expedia went on for a long time without any users, but they were still building stuff to scale. And I was like, what are you scaling for? We don't even know if the first piece had worked. Like we were stuck in this loop of scaling everything. Or is it built for scale? It's like, but we haven't any users. What are we scaling for? Shouldn't we first have users and then like start to get them to use it, put blocks together? So that kind of scaling up. I don't know if you guys have seen some experience of that where people are focused on scaling something first and then think about because the engineers are like super excited, no offense to them, about using all these amazing new services. Yeah, we could build this, we could do that. Oh, this is awesome. And they're lost in the focus of how many people are using it. I don't know, but when they use it, it will be amazing. We can take 10 million of them, but there are some samples. I find the jokes on LinkedIn to be the best one, where they're talking about these empty graveyard projects where they're scaled up, but there's no users. They're like, how did you scale it if you didn't have any users? Like, what was the point?
Yeah, I've seen that a graveyard of Google products that have been amassing that, great ideas. Some of the social media ones are, what is it? Google Duo? No, that social
Google
media.
Plus.
Google Plus, which is great. I loved it as an app, but it's all about, sure that they designed this for scale as well, because with it being Google, but looking down at how many users are using it now and all of that. So I mean, it's you run the risk of being a waterfall where you're too disconnected from the customers, you're too disconnected from QA, you're kind of too sequential and too rigid in that way as well. But my question was, how do you measure effectiveness and ROI of applications used in program management?
To answer this, I thought about how would I present a request to finance a tool, because I never looked at it when I was when I bought it. But when I was looking for the team, for the organizations to buy MS Office or buy the license for Jira or buy a component, what did I do? So I looked at the benefits. I downloaded a small version. I created a test set. I ran the test set. I got written interviews from the users to say how much better this was, how much time it saved. I might have run it for a few cycles, got an identification that this opened up a few things. Like we were trying to get some extra tools into Jira. I can't remember at the time what they were, but they became common after a while. But when I presented that, it was all about the benefit. Now, looking back on it, how do you look at it? So I think for a TPM, they must use Jira quite a lot, right? They use Slack a lot. They use Miro a lot. They use email a lot. So these are their core tools. The ROI is, can you generate, does it make your job easier? If it's a TPM, you're stuck in Jira all the time and you're not learning how to automate some of the aspects, then and that's the scale piece. Like, how do I make more time for myself? How do I build this thing so I never have to use it again? Can I build a custom report? Because I just want to do this one and done report and then get it out. So learning how to program it is really important. And then you start to get benefits for your time, because then you're using that tool to scale. And, no one's going to, I think your team would notice you have more time, but a TPM having more time will just do something else. Where I would say, okay, if you build more time, use that to see how more efficient you can work for your organization. Don't pick up the next project. Use that scaled time to find out how to scale better. So I think if a tool allows you to automate some of your tasks to do that aspect, then that ROI is you have more time to do something else.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
But hard to measure.
Well, I know in my company, we have Jira, we have all of that. Unfortunately, we use an old version that's server side. We disable a lot of the workflows and things like that. So we have the bare bones Jira, but you don't have that power to further automate and optimize, which I feel that constraint is what's holding you back from further improvements in the workflow.
Well,
You
I
definitely
had
need to
some,
vote for Jira Cloud.
yeah,
Like this will be eye
yeah,
opening for you, Doran. Like
game changing. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I've used it
The,
personally. I just know.
I,
Yeah.
I had a lot of ex-coders on my team, and we used to say, can our tools automate some of our tasks? So, like, we used Jira, Slack, and PagerDuty to capture P1, P2 issues from PagerDuty and load them automatically into Jira, right into the queue
Mm.
of the service engineer, and then automate that into the sprint cycle and automate it through the rest. So therefore, the workflows, we didn't have to do anything. We just saved a
Yeah.
ton of time by using that automation. And the engineers just come in. There was the issue in front of them, from PD, and then they knew the SLAs in it. They could fix it. That saved a tremendous amount of time. So under the hood, ability of Jira and to integrate with some of the other tools in an organization is really great and can save you a lot of time. And that's where the ROI is, and then the TPM no longer has to go review the boards to see if there's issues there and then, take them in and put them into the sprint and do that. It's just, they probably don't even have to go into the Scrum meeting if they have one, it just pops up in the service engineer's account.
Yeah, I could definitely feel that if I'm as a TPM on that side, that automation, going from where I am now, then there's numbers you can put in ROI, but definitely as a TPM, you can feel that you don't have to do all that extra work, and the tool gets out of your way. Essentially, it's all on the background, which is fantastic. On that note, though, we'll take a quick break, and we'll talk about the TPM summit that's coming up. It's coming up on October 4th in Mountain View, California, in the Historical Computer History Museum, which I've been to many times back when I used to live in California. So it's in its second year, and you will get to use this opportunity to network with amazing decision makers from top companies like Amazon, GitHub, and Uber. And the summit offers great opportunities for growth and connection, including a hot seat coaching with 4 professional coaches, a dedicated TPM bookstore, and networking spaces. Last year featured over 25 speakers from tech giants like Google and Apple, to established upstarts like GitHub and Stripe and DoorDash and Okta, and a lot of those companies you see down on Brenner Street or wherever in San Francisco, coming up there. So go to tpmevents.org, and you can buy a ticket now while they last. So make sure to get your tickets for that. It's a great opportunity, great chance to meet others, and we will be there. Michael and I will be there. We'll be doing a live broadcast podcast all day, chatting with speakers and guests offline. So it's going to be kind of cool. Definitely new for this year as we started the podcast this year, but be an exciting opportunity. So make sure to visit tpmevents.org and get your tickets now. So great opportunity. And over to you, Michael. I think you had a question.
Yeah, I think so. The vibe like really last year was really great, and I need to do that. Like Paul, you're coming to, or is it too good in Switzerland to not spend October with us, to come to California? There's a time where in Europe the weather is getting bad, so why not hopping over and enjoying the show?
What's the next
All right,
question?
we definitely have an action item to follow up after that one. Coming back to the topic.
I would say maybe snowboarding in Tahoe. I don't know, or somewhere. I don't know if there's any snowboarding there, but maybe.
All right, great. So let's get back to scaling as TPM. So what we covered is more the application side, and we want to spend some good amount of time like on the processes. Who doesn't love processes in all fashion? They're around us everywhere, and also connecting it like to today's like topic, Paul. Like maybe you can take us along, like what is high level you can tell us on about scaling processes as a TPM specifically, like starting off with the entry point here.
Yeah. I think over my time in organizations, I've created a lot of processes, whether it's an ETL workflow. And just step back, I did a master's degree, didn't finish it because I went into the .com era on operational research, which is the mathematics behind execution flows. So that's my background is processes, how to build them, how to manage them, how to monitor them, and how to see if they're effective. So I studied that for quite a few years. And I did the quantitative mathematics is basically, operational research. This was the mathematics before data scientists, so old school approach. And in that, so I've done a lot of process. And, when we look at a process, you're always building process. Can I do a retrospective better? What's the best process for a retrospective? How do I manage that? Get them in the rooms. We do processes all the time. We fine tune them. We try to get them to have an outcome. In Expedia, I went from, processes to my team, to multiple teams, to divisions, to the organization. So I have had some experience of putting a process across the whole org and what that means, and how it kind of grows legs and goes in places or emerges in different ways to how you taught. And the interest about that is seeing how it kind of evolves and turns into, gives off different values that you didn't think it could. So for me, I did a course with MIT on design thinking, and I was more than thrilled that they actually had services and processes in there as design thinking outcomes. So that was great for me, because then I wanted to show that to some of the engineers. I was like, no, hey, processes are actually important. I used to be renowned as a love of process, and I don't think anyone ever said to me my processes were successful or they were easy. They were always super complex. Can't you do this more simply? And some processes were, hey, my manager came to me once and said, 6 weeks time, we need to get a full intake system across 1,400 engineers. We need to kickstart the business in 6 weeks, get it done, and so I was under a huge remit from the leadership to get that done. The process was obtrusive to begin with, because everyone had to follow it. But, 3 years later, it was still used by the whole organization because it was needed, but it was allowed to evolve itself. So how do you do that? So for me, when I had a process, so let's take the organizational, I knew it wasn't the first time someone had done this. So I found out different parts of the organization that did something, followed this process before. And then I interviewed each of the people who worked in that process. What did you not like about this? What did you like about this? Because as I was introducing it, I wanted the system to see some familiarity in the process. I didn't want everyone to say, oh my God, this new thing. Say, oh, hang on, I know this. I know that. That's the same. So I wanted familiarity. So I interviewed a lot of people who had the same process, and I took the best of everything and I learned the worst. Then I said, okay, let's build something. So we went into a rapid cycle of development. We actually built this tool on Jira forms. And then we shared that front end back to the people who had used the system before. So that was twofold. I was getting their feedback, but I was getting their buy-in, because I was saying, hey, I've designed this based on your feedback. And they were like empowered, and they were more inclined then to use it because they felt they owned it. So I wanted to incorporate them into that process so they could follow it. I talked to the people over my time. I found out who hated process, and they were the people I talked to most about new process, because I was like, they were my barometer for the amount of problems I would have. So I would have often testy arguments about the value statement of what I was trying to do, and then I basically got their reasoning as to why not. And design thinking tells us, take as many roles into account as possible. Be as diverse as you can in who you interview. And that's what I would do, is like interview as many people as I could, rapidly test it, either in a visual form of the process itself, or actually build it out on the workflow. And I was gradually moving all the way through this, and then let it go, right? So when you let it go, you have to have some documentation on how to do it. So you need people who don't know anything, who didn't turn up to the training meeting, to find out how to do it. It needs to be simple. It has to be visual. It's going to have a ton of mistakes because you're writing it from your perspective. You know it already. So again, we had other people review it, give feedback, test it. Okay, here, can you onboard to the system in 5 minutes? And then they would hit walls. So the time frame of 6 weeks was great, because we actually had a lot of freedom to get time off multiple people to run through this cycle really quickly. And then at the end of it, when we did release it, we measured it. So there was metrics on everything. So we put like gates on when people went through different parts of the process. We timed it. We were able to say, hey, team 6, you've done nothing. And the report was agnostic. It just said Team 6, nothing. And that the owner of Team 6, the manager, go, hey, you're Team 6, they've done nothing. So it wasn't my fault they'd done nothing. They had done nothing. So I just let the data speak for itself as to how the process was moving. And then over time, we got tons of feedback from people. And I reached out for people because before I just let stuff go. And I was like, I don't care. I if the leadership said I could do it. But, as the more older I got, the more I cared. And then I went talk to people, found out why they didn't like it, and I adapted it. And I showed them the adaptation because I wanted them to know that I was listening, that I did care that this process was working for them. So, that's how I made it work. And then when I moved away from the process, like it wasn't mine anymore, a different team managed it across the org, it actually evolved into something I didn't want. We designed it to be agile in that a team could do this intake anytime they wanted. So like if you look at a quarterly planning system, you plan for 6 weeks, then you start, then you build for 5 weeks, then you start planning for 6 weeks. And it's really, it's not nice. Whereas if you had a fluid system where you're just building all the time, taking in intakes from the organization, it would be easier. So, but I wanted the PRD to be an agile story, but actually it became a way of throwing the requirements across the fence. And it actually didn't evolve the way I wanted it. It became more of a, well, I gave you the requirement and that's what I wanted. And it dropped the need for teams to talk. And I didn't own the process at that stage, but I kept looking at it to see how it would evolve. And that was the bad thing, which I would have changed or tried to change, where it was more, hey, if you have a big feature, you need to go have an inception, or do a design thinking workshop.
Let's quickly blend it together. 1,400 engineers, 50 TPMs. You want to scale. How do you ensure that innovation is not getting disrupted by process? And that everyone is following the process at the end of the day.
Yeah, so the reporting was key, right? And we had gates. So you needed to get from A to B. We gave you a recommendation on how to get from A to B, but you could get to A to B how you wanted. I just cared you got to B, and we would measure you got to B, right? And then we would try to allow teams to get to the point as much as we wanted. So we had guardrails there that teams would want to follow. But yourself, you give a requirement to a team, 2 cycles in, they're doing it completely different to how you had told them to do it, but they're still coming out with the result. So they innovate in the cycles to get to the end. So what we did was we on the interviews, we got the feedback back and we shared with everyone else what teams are doing to get the accomplishment. And then, other people would say, actually, this is a framework. So yeah, like if you look at a sprint cycle, you start week 1, you finish week 2. Whether you're doing Scrum, Scrumban, extreme programming, what comes out at the end is the thing that's measured. If it's ineffective, people will go into your cycle and say, is your process working effectively? We allowed them to do as they want, right? We had a team where we were implementing SLAs and we wanted, we just adapted Datadog. And this team, I went to the teams who had the greatest passion for quality and process, so I would go for the team that would give me the best bang for the buck when I was actually going for the process. I went to them and I hooked up with them and I said, right, how do we actually build this? I allowed them to innovate everything. I just said, get this thing to look like that. Then they just figured out how to do it. like they were the engineers who were going to build it at the end of the day. I just knew they had to come out with this outcome, which was an SLA that could be measured and met, SLA, SRE. So they start building their own way of doing it. And they come up with these great templates for standardized SLA formats or measurement on Datadog. And we distributed them across the whole org. And that saved a ton of time from the engineers. It gave dashboard consistency, that it was hard to get that, but that itself built this reputation. Yeah, he comes out with these processes, but he worked with us completely in it. So it's actually our process. So the inclusion of the actual people who are impacted by the process is really important. I'm just the product manager of the process to see it works, but the people who are most impacted are those who are using it. And an engineer will get a way to do something on a Monday. 2 Mondays in, they're going to do it differently. It can be more effective. They're going to find ways to automate it, to make it more efficient. And you just need to let the system do that itself. And then watch it, because it might diverge in a different way, and then you need to gather it in. But if you show that you're interested in the innovation, then it's okay. But at the end of the day, people are very, what's the word? They're not welcoming for processes no matter what. I've never had, oh, great, Paul, can you come in and create a new process for us? It was never, I actually had this reputation of building processes without telling anyone. I would tweak the system so much that eventually I would get the organic growth of the process I wanted, because I hated the disruption. I hated the feedback, all this on meetings about this person's angry. I was like, okay, can I do this without really impacting anyone? And that was more of a dark art influence negotiation form. And that was better, but it was a longer burn. But sometimes you wouldn't have sponsorship to do it. And that's probably something you get the more skills you earn at TPM, is that dark art of like tweaking the right character, working on the culture to get the outcome you want without actually saying, hey, I'm going to build this new process.
And also
That's
we
the
touched
hard one.
Doran, and Doran, we touched also the people topic now. Maybe like last one we go to technology.
Yeah. I was gonna say when you talk about the dark art, I mean, there's also people, of course, when it comes to scalability and how they're able to. Yeah, we can go into a whole topic on that, but just for the sake of time, let's jump into the third pillar, which was technology. So we talked about applications, we talked about process. So on the technology front, what are the core technical skills that are essential for TPMs to be effective in engaging engineers and engineering managers? Which kind of blends a bit into people side too, I guess.
Yeah. I've seen technical TPMs who spend too much time with the engineers solving the problem technically. I've seen non-technical do everything possible except get in the room when they're talking about the technology. So it's the division of there. So I finished as a data architect on a Friday, and I started as a TPM on a Monday. And the engineers, pretty smoothly told me I was no longer an engineer. I had no right to an opinion about the way we're building this thing. And that was right, because I didn't have skin in the game. I wasn't the person who's going to get woken up if it was broken, right? So, but I still had to make sure that the thing that they were building met the use cases. And so I was like, I knew enough about the technology that I could identify if something was wrong, because I'd been 15 years as an engineer, but it wasn't my remit to do that. I had to find a different way of getting it done. So I had an advantage of being technical at the time, and I just had to identify, how can I question in the right way, or drop the right question that the engineer will react. So it was, I'd be in meetings with users, and the product manager was there, and I'd pick up so much different stuff because the engineers weren't in those rooms about some of the use cases, because the business ran their use cases. And I was like, oh, so there are people in Australia. Our APIs won't go to Australia because we were in a prem at the time. So I was like, note, so we have to test this. So I was able to identify some of the technical acceptance criteria within my discussions, and I was able to bring that into the meeting and talk to the engineering leads about the use cases. So whenever they talked about something at the end of sprint, my demo questions were, does it meet all these use cases? And I would have, and how do you meet that use case? And then I would ask, so what happens if we double our users? Does that just take it? Do we have to buy a new server? Because we had to wait like 6 months back in the day for a new server. And I was the person who had to request the servers. I was the person who got all the questions about it. So the last thing I was going to do was, drop the project because we needed new servers. So I was always on about, will this scale properly? Because it took so much longer to actually scale a product. So I always identified, what are the things I need to know when I go in that room? Because I trusted the engineers, and if they didn't build it right, they got called out. They would, they're more open to learning than other forms of the business. And I had great partnerships with those engineers. Sometimes they hated me, and that's okay. My job was to question what's going on in a professional way. I got on great with everyone. So the scale piece is like identifying what you need to know. So for me, you need to be able to architect your system, not to the, what services are used. You don't even to know how those services are used, but you need to know them. You need to know the scale limitations of it. You need to know what's the communication in, what's the communication out, how is that communicated? Like, is it pulled from the DB? Is it pushed from the DB? Like, what kind of APIs? Are they multiple different APIs? Who owns those APIs? And with that map, you have the ownership, the stakeholders, the technology, the versions. So you need to build up that visualization of everything. And it's not just the architecture. It's stakeholder 6. What's their motivation? What drives them? And that kind of systems design of your system is really important. And then you start to learn about the engineers. So we had one of our clients coming in. They worked in the pricing area of Expedia, competitive intelligence. And the person was renowned as being a hard ass. And I was like, no, he works in the front end of pricing. So his requirements are like this. He needs things to happen so much faster. So that's why he's demanding, because changes are impacting the bottom line. So you need to understand that you need to move faster. You need to give them better information. You need to give them higher quality than all the other people because they're on this front end. So I was able to, identify by the stakeholders some of the technology needs that stakeholder would have, as opposed to the BI team downstairs who might be okay with dumping it to an Excel spreadsheet. So you need to understand the use cases and the users to give the right information to the engineers so they could scale correctly. And I was a great advocate of getting that information because I knew that when you build something, if they didn't tell you something critically important, which wasn't important to them, it messed up your whole architecture because you had to, actually, it won't work. So I was always going crazy trying to find out as much information as possible to give to the engineering team that would allow or mitigate some of the risks of failure. That's a very roundabout way of, you need to understand what level of technology you have. If you're working with a team starting off, I would argue you don't need to be highly technical because that's why the engineers are there. But you need to identify, I guess you hear some crazy estimates, 6 weeks to build that. Didn't that take you 2 weeks last time? And yeah, but we're doing this, blah, blah. So you have to be aware that sometimes to know someone's trying to buy time. If I had that feeling in my stomach where someone was taking me for a ride, I go, hang on. And I'd bring in their manager and say, hey, can you explain this to me? Because I don't quite get this. I was never shy to have that, look like an idiot, because if I was an idiot, I'd say, okay, cool. At least I'm cool, then I can defend you to that other stakeholder. But the technical aspect is very situational. But the warning is, don't get too deep. If you're too deep, you're not doing something else. Your job is to manage the delivery of the program or project. So, and you'll be told pretty quickly by your engineering team if you're not technical enough, right? Yeah. So I always got feedback to say they're not technical enough. And I would defend and say, why did they need to know that? And sometimes I'd get, because they can't question the engineers on the architecture. I'm like, but that's the engineering manager's job. So my person's job is to manage that dependency and get why are they responsible for the architecture or asking the right question? So sometimes there was this avoidance thing where the TPM was doing too much in the role. But so I was trying to balance it, and I'd be like, I used to get a lot of feedback on one in particular. And I was like, yeah, but he's amazing at stakeholder management because he has the worst stakeholder. And, these are the ups and downs. That stakeholder never gives you grief because that person is brilliant at that. You want them to stop doing this and then go into technology. And they're like, actually, I see your point. No, that's okay. So it was for me opening the stakeholder impact to more of the things that the TPM actually does. Because, at the end of the day, they think you use Jira, you print a report and you send out minutes for a meeting. But that's the exposure. Behind the hood, you're doing so much more that they'll never notice or take into consideration. So you just have to figure out what you want.
Not all heroes wear capes, I gotta say.
Yeah. I would, in my time off, I have been in that read Systems Design Interview by Alex Zhu and watched most of his posting on LinkedIn. It's awesome, and then if you want to look at takedowns of scaled architecture systems, they're gold dust, so you can watch an interview question on Google, show me how Spotify works and how do you scale it by 10. And if you watch that as a TPM, because it might be complex, but it's very understandable. you will then understand scale, and to a scale where you can ask the right questions, you can look at the right drivers, and those things are brilliant. If you're short on the technical, start reading those things, right? Because they're super, super good.
Yeah.
And with that, like a big shout out to Alex Yu on hitting 1 million subscribers yesterday. That's really a gold mine with White Go.
Yeah, the book's great. I actually read it more than once. Literally, I actually go back and read it a few times. Even a couple of years, a year apart, I just read it again. So
yeah, it's great. Yeah, it's like for a TPM interviewing, you should be reading those books because you can probably cover most things by that. And brilliant, and makes it so easy to understand for me.
Absolutely. And on that note, I know we can speak for hours about scale. There's a lot of questions we have, but we gotta close off this podcast. But wanted to thank you very much for joining us, Paul. It's been very enlightening. It's amazing chat. We learned a lot, and I'm sure our audience has as well. And we urge our audience to connect with you on LinkedIn. Hopefully not harass you with all these invites, but if you have any other social media or any other posts that you do, going to shout out to on this podcast, feel free. Or if you want to be on incognito, that's good too.
I don't, but I'm actually okay with people pinging me. At the moment, I'm taking my sabbatical from everything, so I'm trying to get back into the cycle of TPMing. I do miss the thing I miss about being a TPM is kind of not the organizational, but more the divisional. So like owning a product, a big product, like that for me was the best times, or managing multiple products, not being so strategic, but actually being in the detail. That's great. If you're a TPM in that area, just enjoy it. You're not going to get a cape. You're not going to get a medal. You're very rarely get called out for being amazing, but your management team will appreciate you. And you'll know yourself that you've done things, you've tweaked little things that have resulted in effectiveness. You can put that in the back and go, I did that. No one else might see it, but it's I really, really enjoyed being a TPM. So I'm happy for people to contact me.
Thank you, Paul, also for joining from my side. We leave it open to the audience if we see each other on 4th of October at the TPM Summit in Mountain View, and then we take selfies, post it on LinkedIn, and maybe welcome you back on the live broadcast.
Definitely. You take care, and thank you very much, everyone. And see you all very soon.
Ciao. A bientôt.